Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Rezmha Zevannia A with the study number is 206130001. Also my friend Qurrotu Aini Laila Ramadhani with the study number is 2061303. We are going to present our presentation of human anatomy and physiology assignments, which the title is nervous system in the brain. So let us begin the presentation and happy watching.
So we are in the first slide where is correlation between brain and nervous system. As you can see in the picture, receptor receive the stimulus and then deliver it to brain as CNS by sensory neuron, and brain will produce effector by motor neuron as the response. So the brain is like a computer that controls the body's function, and the nervous system is like a network that relays a message to parts of the body. The brain is the control center for registering sensation, correlating them with one and another, and with stored information, making decision and taking action. It also is the center for intellect, emotion, behavior, and memory. Okay, we are next to the second slide, major parts of brain. As we know that brain is a control center of all body's activity, so it has four major parts, that is brainstem, cerebellum, diencephalon, and cerebrum. So we will discuss and explain it to the next slide.
In this slide, I'm going to discuss about the brainstem. The brainstem continues with the spinal cord and consists of the medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. The medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain is the three parts in the brainstem. The brainstem is located between the spinal cord and the diencephalon. The brainstem has many basic functions, including regulation of heart rate, breathing, sleeping, and eating. It also plays a role in cognition. All information relayed from the body to the cerebrum and cerebellum and vice versa must traverse the brainstem. You can see that this is the structure of the posterior inferior aspect of brain. The first that I'm going to explain is the medulla oblongata. Medulla is continuous with the superior part of the spinal cord. It forms the inferior part of the brainstem. These processes called the pyramid. They are formed by a large corticospinal tract that passes from the cerebrum to the spinal cord. The corticospinal tract controls voluntary movement of the limb and trunk. Vesicle nucleus and cuculate nucleus. They are nuclei that are at the right and left. Nuclei associated with sensation of touch, pressure, vibration, and conscious proprioception are located in the posterior part of the medulla. The medial lemniscus is the axon that ascends to the thalamus in band of white matter which extends through the medulla, pons, and midbrain. The gustatory nucleus, the medulla is part of gustatory pathways from the tongue to the brain. It receives gustatory input of the taste buds of the tongue. The cochlear nuclei is in the medulla are part of the auditory pathway from the inner ear to the brain, and they receive the auditory input from the cochlea and the inner ear. The vestibular nuclei is the part of medulla and pons that are components of the equilibrium pathway from the inner ear to the brain. They receive sensory information associated with equilibrium pro- from the proprioceptors in the vestibular apparatus of the inner ear. The next is vestibulocochlear 8 nerves. Its several nuclei in medulla receive sensory input from the private motor output to the cochlea of the internal ear via the vestibulocochlear nerve. This nerve convey impulse related to hearing. The next is glossopharyngeal 9 nerve. This nuclei in the medulla relay sensory and motor impulse related to taste, swallowing, and salivation via the glossopharyngeal nerve. The next is vagus 10 nerve. This nuclei in the medulla receiving sensory impulse from the prophet motor impulse to the pharynx and larynx, many thoracic and abdominal viscera via vagus nerve. The next is accessory nerve, or you can see its cranial portion. These fibers are actually part of the vagus tail nerve because the nuclei in the medulla are the origin of nerve impulse that controls swallowing via the vagus nerve, or you can see its cranial portion of accessory nerve. The last is hypoglossal 12. The- These nuclei, these nuclei in the medulla are the origin for nerve impulse that control the tongue movement during speech and swallowing via the hypoglossal nerve. Medulla oblongata contains sensory ascending and motor descending tract. Cardiovascular center regulates heartbeat and blood vessel diameter. The medullary respiratory center, together with pons, it regulates the breathing. The medulla oblongata contains brachionucleus, cuneate nucleus, gustatory nucleus, cochlear nuclei, and vestibular nuclei. They are components of sensory pathways to brain. Inferior olivary nucleus provides instruction that the cerebellum used to adjust muscle activity when learning new motor skills. Other nuclei coordinate the vomiting, swallowing, sneezing, coughing, and hiccuping. The medulla oblongata contains a nuclei of origin for vestibulocochlear 8, glossopharyngeal 9, vagus 10, accessory 11, and hypoglossal 12. Reticular formation also informs midbrain and giant phenolon. The function in consciousness and arousal. At the pons part, there is pontin nuclei. The pons has two major structural components, that is, a ventral region and a dorsal region. The ventral region of the pons form a large synaptic relay station consisting of scattered gray center. And then there is trigeminal fiber. It is nuclei in the pons that are receiving sensory impulse for somatic sensation from the head and face and provide motor impulse that govern sharing via the trigeminal nerve. The next is there is abundant 6 nerve. It is a nuclei in the pons that provide motor impulse that control eyeball movement via the abundant nerve. The third is facial 7 nerve. It is a nuclei in the pons that are receiving sensory impulse for gaze and provide motor impulse to regulate secretion of saliva and tears and also contraction of muscle for facial expression via the facial nerve. The last is there is vestibulocochlear 8 nerve. It is a nuclei in the pons that is receiving sensory impulse from and provide motor impulse to the vestibular apparatus via the vestibulocochlear nerve. This nerve conveys impulse related to balance and equilibrium. The next is midbrain. in the midbrain, or you can say another name is mesencephalon. It extends from the pons to the diencephalon. At this midbrain, there is oculomotor nerve. This nuclei in the midbrain provide motor impulse that control movement of the eyeball, while accessory oculomotor nuclei provide motor control to the smooth muscle that regulate constriction of pupil and change in shape of the lens via the oculomotor nerve. The next is trochlear nerve. It is a nuclei in the midbrain that provide motor impulse that control movement of the eyeball via the trochlear nerve. Okay, next we move to the second major part of the brain. It is called the cerebellum. Cerebellum is posterior to the brainstem. It has a highly folded surface. It contains nearly half of the neurons in the brain, posterior to the medulla and pons, and inferior to the posterior portion of the cerebellum. The shape is resembles as a butterfly. It is called pyramid and cerebral hemisphere. Okay, so we go back to the structure of the cerebellum because I'm going to explain the structure of the cerebellum. As you can see at this part, this is cerebellum based on the superior view and inferior view. This shape is look like a butterfly. The central one is called pyramid. The shape is look like a worm, and the wings is called cerebral hemisphere. Each hemisphere consists of lobes separated by the deep and distinct fissures. It is the anterior lobe and posterior lobe. The anterior lobe and posterior lobe govern subconscious aspect of skeletal muscle movement. At the right one, at the inferior view, there is flocculonodular lobe. This one, flocculonodular lobe. It is on the inferior surface contribute to equilibrium and balance. At the cerebral cortex, there is the superficial layer of the cerebellum. It consists of perimeter in a series of slender parallel folds called folia or leaves. Next is teres arbor vitae in the cerebellum. It deep on the perimeter are tracts of white matter that resemble branches of a tree. Even it deeper within the white matter, there are cerebral nuclei, region of perimeter that give rise to axon, carrying impulse from the cerebellum to the other brain center. The next is cerebral peduncles. It is a superior one, middle one, and inferior one. The superior cerebral peduncles it contain axons that extend from the cerebellum to the red nuclei of the midbrain and to several nuclei of the thalamus. And the middle cerebral peduncles that are the larger peduncles and their axon carry impulse for voluntary movement from the pons nuclei, which is receive input from motor areas of the cerebral cortex into the cerebellum. The last one is the inferior cerebral pedunculus. It consists of the first is axon of the spinocerebral tracts that carry sensory information into the cerebellum from proprioceptors in the trunk and limb. The second is axon from the vestibular apparatus of the inner ear and from the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons that carry sensory information into the cerebellum from proprioceptors in the head. And the third is axon from the inferior olivary nucleus of the medulla that enter the cerebellum and regulate the activity of cerebral neurons. Sorry, it's activity of cerebral neurons. And the first is axon that extend from the cerebellum to the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons. And the last is axon that extend from the cerebellum of the reticular formation. The primary function of cerebellum is to evaluate how well movement initiated by motor areas in cerebellum are actually being carried out. The cerebellum detects the discrepancies. It sends feedback signal to motor areas of the cerebral cortex via its connection to the thalamus. The feedback signal helps correct the error, smooth the movement, and coordinate complex sequence of skeletal muscle contractions. The cerebellum is the main brain region that regulates posture and balance. These aspects of cerebral function make possible all skilled muscular activities, from catching a baseball to dancing to speaking and etc. Smooth and coordinated contraction of skeletal muscle and regulates posture and balance, and it may have role in cognition and language processing.
So the third part of brain is the encephalon. The encephalon forms a central core of brain tissue just superior to the midbrain. And the encephalon also contains numerous nuclei in wide variety of sensory and motor processing between higher and lower brain centers. So the components of the encephalon are thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. First part of the encephalon is thalamus. Thalamus consists of period oval masses of gray matter with interspersed tracts of white matter, and thalamus is a major relay station for most sensory pulses and also contributes in motor functions by transmitting information from the cerebellum. You can see the picture below that a bridge of gray matter called as interthalamic adhesion and a vertical white sap sheet of white matter called as internal medullary lamina. So there are seven major groups in each side of thalamus. The first one is anterior nucleus that receive input from the hypothalamus and sends output to the limbic system. And then the second one is medial nuclei that receive input from the limbic system and basal nuclei. The third is lateral group that receive input from the limbic systems and superior colliculi and also the cerebral cortex. And the fourth is ventral group. And then the fifth is intraliminal nuclei. The sixth is midline nucleus or forms a thin band adjacent to the third ventricle and has a presumed function in a memory and olfaction. And then the last one is reticular nucleus that surround to the lateral aspect of the thalamus. Next, to the second part of the encephalon, or we can call it hypothalamus. There are four major regions. The first one is mammillary region, and then the second one is tuberal region. The third is supraoptic region. The fourth is preoptic region. Hypothalamus controls many body activities and one of major regulators of homeostasis. So the important function of hypothalamus are controls of ENS, production of hormones, regulation of emotional and behavioral, control of body's temperature, regulation of cardiac rhythm, and the last one, regulation of eating and drinking. Another part of the encephalon is epithalamus and then circumventricular organ. Epithalamus is a small region superior and posterior to the thalamus, consists of the pineal gland and habenular nuclei. So, for the circumventricular organs, these regions coordinate homeostatic activity of the endocrine and nervous system, such as the regulation of blood pressure, fluid balance, hunger, and thirst. The last part of a major brain is cerebrum. Cerebrum, called as seat of intelligence because it provides us with the ability to read, write, and speak, to make calculation and compose music, to remember the past, plan to the future, and imagine things that have never existed before. So, cerebrum consists of five parts. The first one is cerebral white matter, and next cerebral cortex, and also cerebrum lobes, limbic system, and the last one basal nuclei. Next to the part of cerebrum, the first one is cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is region of gray matter that forms the outer rim of the cerebrum. The cerebral cortex contains billion of neurons arranged in layers. So part of cerebral cortex are fissures, sulcus, cerebral hemispheres, and corpus callosum. Okay, next to the lobes of cerebrum, as we know in the high school, there is four lobes, and each cerebral hemisphere can be further subdivided into four lobes. The first one is frontal lobes, the second is parietal lobes, the third is occipital lobes, and the last one is temporal lobes. Okay, the frontal lobe is important for cognitive function and control of voluntary movement or activity. The parietal lobe processes information about temperature, taste, touch, and also movement. And the occipital lobe is primarily responsible for vision. So we are in the last slide. Another part of cerebrum. The third is cerebral white matter that consists of myelinated axon. The first one is association tract that contain axon that conduct nerve impulses between gyri in the same hemisphere, and then the second one is commissural tract contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from gyri in one cerebral hemisphere to corresponding gyri in one or another cerebral hemisphere. And the last one is projection tracts that contain axons that conduct nerve impulses from the cerebrum to lower part of CNS um, or from the lower part of CNS to the cerebrum. Then the fourth is basal nuclei. These nuclei have been called the basal ganglia because of ganglion is aggregate of neuronal cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. The last one is limbic system that consists of limbic lobe, dentate gyrus, amygdala, septal nuclei, mammillary bodies, and olfactory bulbs. Amygdala is composed of several groups of neurons located close to the tail of the caudate nucleus, and septal nuclei are located within the septal area formed by region under the corpus callosum. And mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus are two round masses close to the midline near the cerebral peduncles. And the last one is olfactory bulbs are flattened bodies of the olfactory pathway that rest on the cerebriform plate. Maybe that's all from me and Rezmha Zevannia. Thank you for your kind attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.